Yeah, I was in the Navy. This was one of my hats when I was on the USS Iwo Jima. The ship today is Razor Blades. It was decommissioned and didn't have a future. I have retired, so I am now technically decommissioned, but I hope it's a while before anyone turns me into Razor Blades. And I'm delighted to have been asked and to be offered a free meal and so forth.
Sorry about the lobster.
Yeah, it wasn't the lobster, but we make it. In November of 2004, I was on a bus, as one of 30 people, headed from the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. to the Darden School of Business at the University of Virginia. Brookings Institution was conducting a senior executive seminar on the subject of morality, public policy, and ethics. The seminar was being funded by the Internal Revenue Service. 15 of the people on the bus were newly selected SES leaders in the IRS. That SES is, in military parlance, newly selected as admirals, generals, senior levels of responsibility. But according to the Brookings Institution rules, when they do a seminar like that, no more than 50% can be from one particular agency because that skews the nature of the conversation. So the word went out to various military commands up and down the East Coast. And since I was in my last active duty assignment, but that was involved with ethics, morals, and the like throughout the Navy, and since I had done, for example, some training for the Navy SEAL community in combat ethics, they figured, well, maybe it'd be fun dropping you into the middle of the IRS. So that happened. On the bus, I happened to sit next to one of the new selectees from Internal Revenue Service. He was in his early 40s, I guess, and he looked at me, and when we did our mutual introductions, and he learned that I was also a Navy chaplain, his first question was, very graciously, "What are you doing here?" And I explained a bit of my background and why I was there, and he said, "Well, what do chaplains do anyway? I mean, I'm sure you do church services and Bible studies and stuff, but how else do you do things that you draw a paycheck from the government?" And I said, well, chaplains, yes, do worship services and Bible studies and so forth, but they also work the crowd in a number of other ways. Chaplains are the only ones at a command, a unit, that have privileged communication. Now, certainly, if there's an attorney on board a ship or with a unit for specific legal purposes, that would hold, but chaplains have that by virtue of their pastoral identity. And so, in the course of a given week, 95% of the people I might talk to about marriage issues, finance issues, the recruiter lied to me, I'm lonely, my parents aren't talking to me, my girlfriend's pregnant, a whole raft of things. 95% of those conversations are with people I would never see on a Sunday. But I am seen as their chaplain because I am part of that command, that unit. Now, when the second Gulf War especially broke out, you may recall there was talk about reporters who were embedded in a unit. And they would have these exciting stories. They were embedded with the 1st Marine Division and we're going over the berm. And chaplains are incarnate in the unit. When the unit trains, they train. When the unit deploys, they deploy. When people die, the chaplain is one of the first person who physically handles the remains and puts together whatever stuff the deceased may have had to see it get shipped back home. And but basically incarnate, one of, not just one alongside. And I said a few other things of that sort. Then I mentioned that In the 1980s, the Navy did not have a program, for example, to train those who went to the homes when a service member had been killed and notified them that their loved one had died, and then followed up in that process. There was no training. It was basically you grab a name out of the hat and say, today you've got this duty. If somebody dies, you're the one that needs to go out and tell the news. And so for the Navy and the Marine Corps, who were together in this, there was the need for such training because the Navy was finding a number of situations of acute embarrassment when untrained persons, well-intentioned, went out and knocked at a door and said, your loved one is dead. And they were not prepared for the reaction. So I was sent off to school and worked on that and developed a program which then became sort of a baseline, a first step that later on was developed much more intensely. But I said that was another kind of thing we do. At that point, the IRS person grew very quiet, and he said, you know, my dad was a lieutenant in the Marine Corps, and 38 years ago today he was killed in action. And then he poured out this story. He was a very young child. He had vague memories of his father. He remembered when they came to the house and told his mother, and how after the funeral his father's name was no longer mentioned in the family. And he grew up knowing virtually nothing about his dad. His mom would not talk about him or about the circumstances. She would later remarry happily, and he loved his stepfather and all the rest. But it was only after his mother had died a couple of years earlier, and he was going through a home, that he came across this chest. It's sort of like out of a Hollywood movie. And he popped it open, and there was everything about his late father's life. His bronze star, his Purple Heart, his possessions from the day he was killed, pictures of the family, pictures that he had never seen of his father holding him. And the conversation then took a completely different turn. He asked a lot more specific questions, and as we were arriving on the campus of UVA, he just said, I wish the IRS had chaplains. Because, soften the language, there is so much stuff we see and we do, and we need someone to talk to from time to time. I wish we had chaplains. Well, the military chaplaincy is as old as our nation. The first two actions of the first Congress of the United States was to affirm what we would call the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, and to create the office of chaplain for the United States Senate, which does get in the way of subsequent arguments that indicate that constitutionally there was never an intention to have institutional or governmental chaplaincies for any purpose. You got the very first Congress that sort of acted otherwise. And the current chaplain of the United States Senate is a good friend. I came in the Navy with him. He did a little better than I did, wound up as an admiral, chief of chaplains, and Barry Black is now the Senate chaplain. But institutionally, military chaplaincy has existed for the free exercise of religion, part of that First Amendment right. The free exercise in the sense that when people are sent in the military to places where they don't have ready access to their own sacraments of faith, to their own particular religious beliefs and communities and congregations, that the government does its best to see that they are not punished, essentially, by deprivation from those resources by virtue of serving in their country. So what that means for chaplains is three things. It means, first of all, military chaplains, as a form of institutional chaplaincy ministry, provide for their own. I happen to be a Christian, Protestant, United Methodist. Those are my taglines. And therefore, when I would do church services and so forth, I would do that consistent with the teachings of my church, realizing that in the congregation, there could be people from all over the place. Example, I'm on Guam. I do a Sunday morning communion service. I have 2 chalices. One has grape juice, just like Jesus used at the Last Supper. And the other has the real stuff, just like Jesus used at the Last Supper. And I do that because you've got some folks that are, say, Southern Baptist or Methodist or whatever, and they don't do the hard stuff. And I also had some Lutherans and Episcopals and certain hard-charging Presbyterians and the like, and so the 2 chalices. Well, at the end of the service, and of course, being a loyal United Methodist, I went with Welch's grape juice. Some of the folks came up who used the hard stuff and said, "Chaplain, what was in that chalice?" I said, I used the grape juice stuff. Well, it tasted different. So I went to my enlisted assistant and I said, "What was in the wine chalice?" And he sort of said, "Well," he was from Southern California, "Well, Chaplain, it was like this, you know." I looked in the cupboard and we were out of wine, and I didn't want to borrow Father Johnson's Hudson River water, which is what he uses for his sacramental wine. So I went into my private stash of Harvey's Bristol Cream. I figured it wouldn't matter. I said, "Well, you know, some of these people went back for seconds, and I was sort of curious. What words did I say over there?" So you provide for your own. You facilitate for others. I have made sure that countless Roman Catholic masses, Eastern Orthodox liturgies, Latter-day Saint services, services of a African American gospel tradition, you name it, part of what chaplains do in the institution is to make sure that whatever the faith background of that sailor, that Marine, that soldier, that airman, that those needs are provided for. And so coordinating to see that that happens is something that comes with a trade. I don't say Mass. I'm not allowed to. I shouldn't, and never tried. I don't lead a Sabbath service, although I will tell you this. When I was on the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk, and we're out in the Indian Ocean, we just picked up some refugees from what was then the People's Paradise of Vietnam, the boat people. And about this time, the Jewish lay leader for the ship, and a carrier carries about 6,000 people, comes and says, and he was the ship's dentist, and he says, "Chaplain, we got a problem. Too many people are showing up at Sabbath services." And I said, "Well, what? I mean, usually Protestants would go, whoop, whoop. What is this?" And it turned out, now I don't know if anyone here is Jewish, but at the end of a Sabbath service, you typically will have what's called an Oneg Shabbat, which is just it's a light refreshment time, fellowship time, to use a churchy word. And since aboard Navy ships, only the medical department and the chaplains can have alcohol, and only for sacramental purposes, in the Jewish case, it meant that there would be, little cups of Mogen David that would be passed out at the Oneg Shabbat. And so you had this congregation of about 12 active, observant Jews who would be there, and suddenly there's 20, there's 30, word got out the Jews were having happy hour. And all of a sudden, these characters start showing up. And he said, I don't want to chase anybody away, but this is a bit awkward. And so we talked to the ship's doctor, the senior medical officer, a loyal son of Holy Mother Church, who was a dead ringer for JFK, which was weird for a different set of reasons. And we hatched this plan. So, next Sabbath, you got all these eager guys there, and this was back at the time where it was only guys on a ship. And an announcement is made by the ship's dentist, the lay leader, Jewish lay leader at the start. It says, well, here's the deal. We're glad to see everybody at this service, and we know that you are serious in your desire to embrace Judaism. You need to know that one of the requirements for that is a certain physical process that must be undergone. And therefore, the ship's doctor will be here at the end of the service to take the names of those who may desire to continue in their pathway to Judaism and set up this procedure for you sometime in the coming week. Well, the following Friday evening, there were 10 to 12. I'm sure you folks have seen stuff like this in your local churches all the time.
We do it all the time.
What a deal. Drop your drawers and give me 10%. All right. Well, so chaplains provide for their own, facilitate for others, and care for all. Again, whatever a person's issue or need, regardless of their religious background, chaplains are there to connect them with places to get that help and that assistance. Because of the privileged communication, people know they can come in and chat with a chaplain, and it will not leave the room without their permission. I'll give you just one example in closing, and then I want to open it up if you've got any questions about, you name it. When I was assigned at the U.S. Coast Guard Academy for 4 years in New London, Connecticut, it's like the Naval Academy or West Point that goes through Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and there are about 1,000 students in all. When I was there, in the 4 years there were 11 cases of alleged sexual assault against female cadets. 9 of those 11 cases came to the attention of the administration because the females who had been assaulted first came to the chaplain's office. Not one of those who came was personally active in the religious program. But every one of them knew that the chaplain's office was a safe place to go whenever there was an issue. And so they would come in, they would share their concerns, and then from there action was taken. Basically, overwhelmingly, they just wanted someone to go with them as they sought to pursue this and to deal with it. And it came to a head in one case when a young gal came to see me who indicated she had been, and she was a fine cadet, very good academically and so forth, and that she had been raped the previous evening in Chase Hall, which is the big dorm where all of the cadets were housed. And we talked about this, but she absolutely refused to say anything to anybody else or to give me permission to do so. And so I said, well, let's just stay in touch. This is your decision, but please know anytime you change your mind, ba-da-ba-da. Well, about 3 months later, I get word that she's going to be kicked out of the academy for academic issues. And I call her in and said, what's going on? And she said, I just lost the ability to study, and I just can't get past this, and so they're going to throw me out, but I don't know what to do. And so I said, will you please let me go with you to see another counselor? We had brought, by that point, a female counselor onto staff, not a chaplain, to assist with a variety of issues. She agreed. She and I went and talked to this gal, and this was literally a day before she was to meet with the admiral who ran the thing to be given the boot. And I said, will you allow me to go with you to see the admiral? And so we did. Well, the next day, we're sitting in the outer office. The admiral, who's very faithful in attending worship on campus and all that, sees me sitting next to her, says, okay, come in first. Sit down, chaplain. And then he says, chaplain, I know why you're here. You do? Yes, sir. Why am I here? You're here because you just love everybody and you're soft heart. You don't want to see her kicked out, but her grades are terrible, and you know, I really don't have a choice. And I said, Admiral, her grades suck because she was raped in Chase Hall, and she indicates all of the symptoms of being a victim of sexual assault, which have been verified by yet another source. She was raped. That's why she's fouling up. At that point, the Admiral sat down and said, what do I do? Now, by the way, when you get a senior boss who looks at you and says, what do I do? Milk the moment, you know, with integrity, but milk it. And so I made some suggestions. She was retained. He took a world of heat because the spin publicly became, because the fact, you know, the sexual assault thing was not publicized. And so it was, well, there goes the military, there goes the Admiral. He wants to impress people, so a guy has bad grades, he's kicked out, a woman gets an extra break. He knew that would be the way he'd be described, and he was willing to take that kind of crap because he knew the truth. Chaplains have roles to play. Each branch of the military has chaplains. They are endorsed by various faith groups and traditions, and it's a fun life.